The views expressed in this podcast are those of the panelists and do not necessarily reflect the views of U.S. Money Reserve.
Welcome back to America's Gold Authority podcast. Today we're honored to have Philip Diehl as our guest. Philip was the 35th Director of the United States Mint and former Chief of Staff at the U.S. Treasury. Philip, welcome. Also joining us here, and you've met him before, the Director of Education at U.S. Money Reserve, Brad Chastain. Welcome back, Brad. And finally, Patrick Brunson. Patrick has been with the company for over a decade and talks to our customers every day, hearing their greatest concerns and issues they face. So let's get into a topic that will affect every American, which is tariffs. Okay? It's all over the news. We talked about this on one of the previous episodes, but let's dig into this because since that episode, it's happening. Okay? President Trump just announced some new tariffs. Okay? Paused on Mexico for a minute because he got some help from them at the border, and then backed away from that stance. But what do tariffs do? Do we create another trade war here? We talked about it being posturing last time. I think he's, going forward. What happens now? What happens? We put these tariffs in place. What's going to happen?
Well, first, what is a tariff? It's a tax.
Let's start there. That's even a better question. What is a tariff?
What is a tariff? Tariff is a tax. When a product comes into the country, customs stops it, applies a 15% tax, 25% tax. Somebody has to pay that tax. Well, the company that has ordered that product has to pay that tax. And then it sells a product to another company or eventually to an end consumer. And that tax ultimately shows up in the price of that product.
Right.
Now, steel and aluminum is really getting a lot of attention right now because the most recent tariffs that have actually already been applied, this isn't a threat, this is happening, are being applied to aluminum and steel, and it's really hitting our European allies.
25%?
Yeah, 25% rate. And aluminum and steel are especially important because they go into so many American products as raw material and then impacts the price of those cars, appliances, all kinds of things. And then it's like oil in that it has a very broad effect on the economy. And everything else gets jacked up a little bit because of those expenses. So there is no doubt there is an inflationary aspect to tariffs. Now, what I believe the administration is doing is they're taking a really hard negotiating position.
Sure.
And they say, we mean business about this.
Right.
And they're trying to get concessions. They feel like we've been taken advantage of, we've been too weak, and we've been taken advantage of. And so they're wanting to strike better deals. I'm all for tough negotiating. I love negotiating, and I'm a tough negotiator.
Yeah.
And I get this.
So you agree with the tariffs?
Well, this is what my big concern. No, I don't agree with them. But my big concern is that the world is dividing and shattering, but there's one part of the world that isn't shattering. It's coming together, and that is Russia, Iran, and North Korea. We have North Korean troops fighting on the soil of Europe today. We have the most powerful weapons and effective weapons that Russia is using against a European ally coming from Iran. China is now growing increasingly close to that alliance. So those four countries, four rogue states, at least three of them rogue states, are binding together, and they are all opponents and have the potential of becoming enemies of the United States of America. This is in highly dangerous parts of the world and have been the source of conflict and great concern in the world just in the last 18 months. And at the same time, what we're doing is imposing tariffs and essentially launching a tariff war against our closest allies.
A trade war.
Yeah. And a trade war is like an unarmed war.
Sure.
Trade wars often lead into warfare. And we've seen all of that already happening in a world in which there's tremendous geopolitical conflict going on and potential. And so it's the combination of the shattering of the Western alliance, the growing enemy alliance, if you will, that is happening. It's that context for tough negotiating strategies against our own allies. You know, the Chinese put another 25% on them on top of what has been done before. I'm comfortable with that. I think we have to be careful, but I'm much more comfortable with that than I am targeting our closest allies.
Thoughts on this, Brad? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think the economic and price angles have been covered a lot. I think one thing that I haven't heard anybody discuss, but you have to think about it in terms of the dollar and its reserve currency status, is that one of the main things we provide to this world is the dollars that they use to intermediate between one another.
Sure.
When two countries do not care about each other's currency and they don't have a use for it, the dollar is readily available throughout the world, and the cheapest and most liquid place to convert one currency into, to then convert it into the other. It intermediates all of those transactions. And when you think about what we've already discussed with that role, if we talk about tariffs being trade barriers, that we're not buying as much stuff, we're not exporting as many dollars to the rest of the world anymore either. So when you have a lack of that availability, that is impetus to find substitutes. Whereas right now, when it's readily available, they don't have much of a reason to go a more expensive route in many cases. Some do with Russia and places that have sanctions.
Right.
But those that have debt, that need dollars anyway to repay their debt, when it's readily available, they just keep with the system because it's the easiest thing. But if we're not going to be exporting nearly as much, that not making them available, they'll have more reason to find alternative methods in the long run.
And the dollar-based system that Brad is describing was produced out of the wreckage of World War II.
You know, here we are on the verge of what could end up being a tariff war, a trade war. The tariffs against China have gone into effect.
Right.
The tariffs against on steel and aluminum have gone into effect, and we've been here before. We were here back in the 1930s. As we got into the Great Depression and it intensified, there was increasing pressures to protect the American market. And the Smoot-Hawley Act was passed to raise these tariff barriers in an attempt to protect American businesses and to regrow American employment. But what happened was what was inevitable to happen, and what we're seeing happening already in this situation, and that is the retaliation of other nations who are affected by the tariffs. And this spreads all over the globe like a virus. And so that's the danger that we're in here. Yes, we're all for tough negotiation of tariffs, but it has to be it's a complex process of doing it, and we need to learn the lessons of history. And the lesson from Smoot-Hawley is be careful with trade wars.
This was prior to the Great Depression.
That's right. It's part of the reason why the Great Depression became
unemployment
so intense.
went from 8% to 25%.
Yeah.
It affected a lot of people.
Yeah.
I mean, history has
a
a
whole
way of
generation
repeating,
of
a whole
people.
generation of people.
Yeah.
But history has a way of repeating itself.
Yeah, it
Are we
does.
headed there?
Yes. All indications to me as a student of history, and I read, that's what I do in my spare time is I read history. And as a student of history, yes. And we are remaking the mistakes that have been made before. Our parents learned from those mistakes, and we lost the lesson. And yes, I do believe that we are in danger of repeating those mistakes.
I'm sitting at home right now. I hear what you just said.
What can I do about this? Brad? Pat?
So
what can we do? How do I protect myself And I know we're going to say buy gold, and we're going to say, you can protect yourself, you can hedge, but what truly can I do as a consumer to protect myself against all of this uncertainty, all the craziness going on in the world? What do I do?
There's a lot of answers to that.
Give me the short version here.
So, a lot of people, they don't know the answer to that. That's why they're calling around to places like U.S. Money Reserve. We can sit here and say buy gold all day long because that's what we sell. But they're really just looking for confidence in something that is not being manipulated and is not being used or weaponized to gain, political gain, if you will. And so what I mean by that is, everybody argues that Biden weaponized the dollar with the sanctions with Russia, and now Trump's doing it with the tariffs. It's a tax. At the end of the day, I can't remember exactly what the year was, but I believe it was like right around 1890. You probably know this better than I do, Philip. But I think there was a choice between income tax or tariffs. And the American people chose income tax because they knew exactly what they were going to pay every month or year. Whereas tariffs, it could fluctuate and you have no idea what the price of your goods and services were going to look like. And I think now we've reached a point in history where we may have both. And that scares people. And that's why people are looking for safety. And when it comes to their money, they're looking for safe haven, hard tangible assets that are no longer digital in most cases.
Do you agree?
Yeah. I do, yeah. And I would say have a diversified portfolio. Yep. I mean, a portfolio of stocks and bonds, depending on age and stuff, is still an important part, right? Having having cash. Cash is a terrible preserver of wealth over the long run, but you need to be able to pay for emergencies and have 6 to 8 months or so of emergency savings set aside that you can quickly get to for whatever you may need, right? Those are all things you can do to protect yourself. The thing that most people are missing is that precious metals aspect.
Yeah.
Right.
And as we talked about earlier, with the way the way the world has changed and the way that traditional portfolios were put together and why they were put together based on how they have performed during a pretty unique time in history, that standalone portfolio by itself just isn't going to be enough going into the future. And that's where gold can be added in to bolster that and provide that extra protection going forward. But having a diversified portfolio is really important.
One of the crucial missing pieces in today's economy, politics, culture, and this underlies so much of what we've talked about today. What's missing is trust. People have lost trust in banks, they've lost trust in political institutions, in the economy, in business, and they become increasingly isolated. And I think so much of what is raw in our culture comes from that loss of trust. And I'm going to make a pitch here that seems really self-serving about our company.
Yeah, please.
And I'm with this I'm a big believer in trust as the foundation of relationships, whether they're personal relationships or business relationships or relationships with customers. And when I came to this company 12 years ago, I had built a reputation for building trust with my customers at the United States Mint. That was job one. And when I came on board as a consultant because I wanted to know what the culture of an organization was like. You hear a lot of things, you see a lot of things.
Sure.
You talk to people. And I wanted to be sure that I wasn't just lending my reputation to the company.
Sure.
That the company was committed to doing what needed to be done in order to win consumers' trust, their clients' trust. And here I am 12 years later, and the reason is because I believe I know this company is dedicated to that level of trust in building that kind of trust with its clients. So, I think that's the unique thing we bring to the marketplace. There are several unique things. One is the educational information is second to none. And it's available to everybody free of charge on our website, no obligation to
Gold kit?
And the gold kit, but there's just so much, a wealth of information that in terms of written articles, videos about, I do quite a few of them.
Sure.
And I write all my own scripts. I write my own articles. this isn't a ghostwriter's opinion.
Right.
This is my opinion when I write this stuff, and but I think the key is the trust, the commitment to building trust in our company.
And I know Patrick and his team do a great job, as well as the IRA team here. They do a great job of building trust and understanding. And you know, what I'm gathering is that there's not a cookie cutter approach to this. I mean, everybody has a unique situation and everybody is different. And if you are hearing this or watching this, and if you have questions, call the ladies and gentlemen at U.S. Money Reserve. They're standing by with a wealth of knowledge at their fingertips, and they're happy to answer any questions that you have about precious metals and how you can diversify your portfolio today. I'm your host, Remy Castillo, and thank you for tuning in to another episode of America's Gold Authority podcast.
The markets for coins are unregulated. Prices can rise or fall and carry some risks. The company is not affiliated with the U.S. government or the U.S. Mint. Past performance of the coin or the market cannot predict future performance. All calls recorded for quality assurance. Offer void where prohibited.